on today's Story Beat.
The other thing that's really helpful about the beats is, though they sound on the surface to be about plot, they're really about character transformation.
Sure, of course.
And so it's a complete hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, of course. And so the beats map that journey. So it's very helpful. Obviously there's a lot of talent needed beyond good structure. A writer has to really know how to write great dialogue, have characters sound different, and so many other things have to happen right. But that firm structure can really help build a story that resonates.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, the extraordinary editor and marketer, BJ Markel, better known as BJ, began his film acquisitions career in the earliest days of pay TV, working for Dory Sherry's Theater Vision, Optical Systems Channel 100, and Cinemerica. He headed up acquisitions at the launch of the Disney Channel and was responsible for over a third of its programming. His exclusive Disney Channel acquisitions ranged from Gumby and Rin Tin Tin to the entire Charles Chaplin feature film library. He later moved into home video acquisitions at such companies as USA Home Entertainment, Freeze Entertainment, and Avon. BJ switched from acquiring product to marketing it, eventually landing again at Disney, where he headed up the copywriting team at Disney Parks and Resorts Digital, responsible for all text on such sites and apps as Disneyland.com, DisneyWorld.com, and DisneyCruiseLine.com. BJ retired from Disney Parks in 2020 after 18 years. In 1986, BJ began working with screenwriter and legendary screenwriting guru Blake Snyder. In 2004, BJ edited Blake's first book, Save the Cat, which was published in 2005 and has been the #1 screenwriting book on Amazon ever since. That year, BJ and Blake co-founded Blake Snyder Enterprises. BJ edited Blake's other two books, Save the Cat Goes to the Movies and Save the Cat Strikes Back, the latter published posthumously after Blake's death in 2009. Since then, Save the Cat Goes to the Indies, Blake's blogs, and Save the Cat Writes a Novel have been published. Save the Cat Writes for TV was published in March of 2021. Blake Snyder Enterprises also provides Save the Cat story structure software, story coaching, online and live classes, story cards, and a yearly screenwriting competition for screen and TV writers. For those reasons and so many more, I'm truly delighted to welcome BJ Markel to StoryBeat today. BJ, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be here.
Well, tell us a little bit about your background. We've already heard a tiny bit in the opening here, but where did your interest in show business come from? How did that start?
I think it's just from watching movies as a kid. And, I'm from Buffalo. I remember every Saturday going to the Kenmore Theater, which of course is now a parking lot.
Of course.
For whatever matinee there was, Saturday after Saturday after Saturday. I also remember running home from Sunday school to watch some sitcoms that seemed to be on Sunday afternoon, if my recollection is correct.
Do you remember which ones?
Yeah. I Married Joan, believe it or not. I don't know why I remember that. That was something that I ran home to watch.
That was I Married Joan was a big thrill for you, huh?
I don't know why.
That's really a little bit off the beaten track,
Yeah, it's pretty obscure actually. I should I haven't Googled it. I really should, and see what the hell it was that I was watching. Maybe I could understand why.
Well, all right. So I know that there's some kind of a story about how you became BJ. I'm just curious, how did that happen?
Right. Well, there's a photo of my mom in her 9th month of pregnancy holding a pretty big sign that says "Before BJ," and I was going to be either Brett J, which is the way it turned out, or Betty Jo. They didn't know, and they never called me Brett. or Brett J. They always called me BJ, and I assume if I was Betty Joe, they'd always call me BJ. So it's just always been those initials. But
You would almost be more interesting in life if you had been named Betty Joe.
That's right. Oh, well, maybe next time around. I did one time when I joined the Disney Channel, decided, and I didn't know anyone there, so no one knew me as BJ. I decided I'm going to go as Brett. Sounds more mature. And so when I got to the Disney Channel on my first day, that was 1982, I introduced myself to everyone as Brett. And we had a meeting, that was around 9 o'clock in the morning. We had a meeting at 10:30 with all the management to introduce me and talk about what our plans were, what our hopes were. And 2 or 3 times in the first 10 or 15 minutes of the meeting, people said Brett, and I ignored them. I didn't realize they were talking to me. So about the 15-minute mark of the meeting, I said, okay, listen, you got to call me BJ. I was Brett for about 15 minutes my entire life.
So you've been BJ forever then?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So how did you, I know you went to school for law. So how did you get into marketing and editing and all these other things that you've done? I mean,
law school came about 8 years after I graduated from NYU in one of the greatest gut categories, bachelor's degrees you could think of, the history of theater and cinema. I had gone to Bowdoin College for 3 years and worked really, really hard at a pretty tough school, and I liked it a lot, but I didn't want to stay in Brunswick, Maine. And in fact, I wrote Hal Prince, the theatrical producer.
Sure.
I wrote him a letter in my junior year at Bowdoin saying, I really want to be in theater, and it's a great hobby of mine. And I got a letter back from him. He said, if theater's your hobby, don't waste your time writing to me. You just do it. And that was actually an impetus for me to leave Bowdoin.
That was a very smart piece of advice for him to give you.
Yeah.
It's not the kind of business you want to be in if you're half-hearted about it.
Exactly.
If you're not sure, you really have to be in all the way. So what then were your earliest influences? How did you then wind up down this road of marketing and acquisitions and all that?
Well, my resume just sort of built itself. I mean, I went to New York. I tried to get work on Broadway, off Broadway, various things. I ushered for a while off Broadway. And the first legitimate job I got was with a company called Cablevision. And they had an experiment for pay cable, one of the very first pay cable channels in Sarasota, Florida. And I found that my knowledge of film and understand that I had a sort of, I don't know if it's innate or learned feeling for how to program things together, how to put movies together if you're scheduling movies, what a good double feature would be. And I had lots of ideas for festivals and whatever.
And a lot of that was in your gut. There wasn't any kind of a scientific way to do it. You just
no, it was all my gut and based on my understanding and my frequency of going to movies and knowing a lot about movies and theater.
And you had studied the history of it, so you had a grasp of the whole of it.
I had a grasp of it. I also had sort of a interest in the financial side of it. I mean, one of the things I did at Buffalo, went from the time I was probably 12 or 13, is I took two buses, because you had to transfer from where I live, to go downtown Buffalo to the one newsstand I knew that had Weekly Variety. And I would always pick up Weekly Variety. And so even as a kid, I was really interested in the business of show business and, which films were grossing what. And honestly, I can't explain to you why I was interested in that, but I nurtured it. And it did. I think it helped my overall understanding of the business.
Well, some kids grow up looking at baseball players, and you were growing up looking at show business, which, by the way, is exactly where I was. I was looking at show business.
Right.
So I totally understand that. It's important that you sort of have that feeling early. Otherwise, it's really hard to understand what it is you're going into. I mean, you can learn it, obviously. But all right. So was this before you went to law school or after?
No, this is all way before law school. Actually, I had a pretty decent series of jobs in programming pay television systems in the very beginning with those companies that you mentioned. And that was before HBO used satellite programming. And so all those companies worked we had 3/4-inch video cassettes that we trafficked or bicycled between various cities.
Right.
And once HBO suddenly announced that they were going to use a satellite, all those companies died, like virtually overnight, because no one could compete with HBO's satellite service.
Yeah.
So that was a major moment. And at that moment, a couple of things happened to me. One is I decided I wanted to be a writer. But the other thing is I did go to law school because I talked to a bunch of people in the industry. And I thought that one of the ways to be a producer, one of the more effective routes that a lot of people used in Hollywood, was becoming a lawyer, becoming an entertainment lawyer, and eventually becoming a producer. So I went to law school, got a JD, and I hated it and didn't really ever want to be a lawyer, even in the entertainment industry. But it's part of my background. It actually helped me get certain work, helped me get the Disney Channel acquisitions job.
Because you had a law degree.
Yeah. I was never in business affairs, but it allowed me to negotiate like the general terms in acquiring any product before I passed the licensor or licensee off to business affairs.
Did you take the bar?
I took the bar once, didn't pass. It took 6 months to be notified that I didn't pass, and by then I'd spent 6 months writing the Great American Novel.
So, oh wow! Did you publish that?
I had two agents. I got a great collection of rejection letters, and I had one rejection letter published in the Los Angeles Times.
Oh.
So the book didn't get published, but the rejection letter did. There was a book section every Sunday, which was edited by a wonderful guy named Art Seidenbaum. And he had a column, I think it was called The Last Page, which was on the last page of the book review section every Sunday. And I got a rejection through my agent that said, like, if this was Woody Allen, I publish it, but as an unknown, I can't publish it. So, and there were a few other comments there that I thought said more about the industry than it did anything else. So I just sent it on to Art Seidenbaum and said, hey, I think you might find this interesting. And one Sunday, he never wrote back or anything, but one Sunday I opened the paper, the LA Times, and his article completely quoted every word of that rejection letter and had a comment for every sentence. So sentence one with a comment by Art Seidenbaum, sentence two, all the way through.
Wow.
So that got published.
That's kind of fascinating. Well, I want to, and I'll get off the lawyer bit in a moment, but how has having that experience, having gone through law school and understanding, I guess, contracts and whatever else you studied in law school, how has that then influenced how you've operated all these years in marketing, acquisitions, and so on? Has it been important that you had that education?
I think so. I think, it's helped me. There's a lot of negotiating. There's a lot of understanding of contracts when you buy anything. There's all these terms, and being familiar with them has been valuable.
Well, I think that's what I was trying to get to. I think that there has to be some intrinsic value in it, unless you decide you want to run off and become a circus clown or something. I don't know where it would work there. But yeah, if you're going to be in Hollywood, if you're going to be in the business, I don't think there's any downside to having that knowledge, no matter what you're doing, even if you're an actor or director or whatever. Understanding how deals and contracts work is, I think, a big advantage.
Helps a lot.
So let's talk about acquisitions, which was the early part of your career. Can you describe for those who don't know, which will probably be a huge number of the listeners, what a film acquisitions person does, and why is this important for a company?
So if you're a major studio, you have a pipeline that you fill with your own product. But there's always independent companies, smaller companies that want to put out home videos or want to acquire product for a pay television system or channel, and they need to acquire that product from elsewhere. They don't produce it themselves, or they may produce it partially for themselves. For example, the Disney Channel, when it launched in '82, produced about a third of the programming, original programming for the Disney Channel. Another third was from the Disney Channel vaults, and then a little over a third was acquired product. So my job was to understand the audience, the viewers at the Disney Channel, and try to find product that would appeal to them, would match the Disney product, have the same feel.
And thus Gumby and Rin Tin Tin, which were not Disney products. Exactly.
And Charles Chaplin Library especially.
Sure, of course. And because obviously Disney didn't start any of those, but the Disney Vault would have been a huge source of programming, I assume.
Oh, it was a ton. Yeah, it was a ton.
Because that's a very big and valuable vault. And so the acquisition person or acquisitions team or whatever it would be, your job then is to acquire stuff that would actually fit into whatever their the theme of whatever that programming is.
Exactly. The company would tend to have a philosophy and probably a fairly defined target audience. So later, when I went to USA Home Entertainment, they had a division called Family Home Entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Family Home Entertainment had the Care Bears and Strawberry Shortcake, all this kind of animation. I helped acquire that. Home Entertainment had more traditional film. So I'd acquire stuff like Bolero with Bo Derek, 1984, that version with John Hurt.
Where would you start? How would your thinking go? You knew what the sort of the genre of material that the company was looking for. So once you had that narrowed your field of acquisition, I assume. But
yeah.
How would you then think your way through it? Did you have a way to plan for what you wanted?
Yeah, there's a ton of markets and festivals throughout the year,
like the American film market.
Like the American film, exactly. And there's something, I don't know if it exists anymore. I don't think it does, called MIFED, which was in Milan every year. And there's a Cannes, not just the Cannes Film Festival, but there's a Cannes Video Festival. So all the acquisitions people would go to those, and all the sellers, distributors, they know all the acquisitions people. So it's there's an open flow of ideas. We always know what's coming. People are always trying to sell us as an acquisition person.
Because there will be some product that's not available for acquisition, right?
Right. But there's a surprising amount that is.
I would think there's a huge amount that is.
Yeah.
How creative is it to be in film acquisitions? Is it just straightforward business, or is there a certain amount of creativity to it?
I'd like to think it's really creative.
In what way? I think that's interesting.
Well, because I think you try to first you have to understand or establish the philosophy of your company and what kind of films you're trying to acquire, what kind of audience you're trying to appeal to. And then when you see all this work, there's so many films that never see the light of day. There's so many, maybe that might not be true today with VOD and streaming.
Right.
Almost anything can get out there, but in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, or even a little later, a lot of films are made. People put their heart into them and put a lot of money into them, and they just never see the light of day. They just fail. They
sit on a shelf somewhere.
Exactly.
And those were films. They weren't video. They weren't digital. They were film.
They were films. A lot of effort, a lot and
big canisters of material.
Yeah, a lot of hernias.
Exactly. You had this, and you needed big projection systems and all that to show them.
Yeah, you spent a lot of time in the projection rooms.
Watching movies. You got to watch movies for a living.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's why there's a creativity there. I mean, it's not just in matching what you think you need for your particular audience, your particular company. It's understanding story. And I believe it's understanding story and why something might be good or why something might fail.
Is there a big difference in acquiring feature films versus TV, or is it pretty much the same thing?
I think it's pretty much the same. I mean, today it really is the same.
So tell us about some of your favorite acquisitions. What were, like, you got something that you were very excited because you landed something you weren't sure you may not be able to get.
I'd be happy to. Actually, the Chaplain Film Library is always at number one, not just because it was Gold Rush and The Great Dictator and all those incredible films, but because of the meeting I had. The Chaplain estate was represented by a guy named Mo Rothman. Mo Rothman was a personal friend of Chaplin's, but he was younger, so he survived longer at Chaplain. And I met him in his suite for breakfast at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, and I came into the suite, dressed nicely in my little suit, but he had his red silk robe on. And he was just an incredible character with his, overflowing with Chaplain stories. But the acquisition was something I was very proud of. I don't believe any of those great films, had ever been shown together.
So I think a lot of the acquisitions people that I've met in my lifetime and people that are in that business, a fair number of them don't have an affinity for the work. It's like they're selling hats or widgets or whatever. Right. It's just a piece of product that they've got to push through a pipeline. But I have a funny feeling you had an affinity for it. You had a love for what you were.
Yeah, I really did. I also sympathize with those people because it is a numbers game too. I mean, if you're at a place, let's say Freeze Home Entertainment, we had to acquire 6 products for every month.
Wow.
And you might find 3 or 4 you really love, and then you've got 2 spots you have to fill. And
would you then hold one in reserve, or is it gone?
You have to do it. I mean, the whole duplication effort, the whole marketing effort, it's all managed, but it's all tied into a number in that case.
All right, I'm going to ask you a question I ask lots of guests, and I'm sure about your perspective on this. From your point of view, what makes a great story or a great movie or a great TV show? What makes it great?
It's almost a ridiculous amount of factors that it's like a perfect. I'm not sure what the metaphor, the phrase is of the perfect storm, which tends to be a negative thing. The positive perfect storm. There are just so many elements in making a movie. Even a bad movie is a miracle. Making a good movie is beyond miraculous.
Yeah, I don't think anybody sets out to make a bad movie. They just turn out that way.
Yes. And there's a lot of factors for that. But I think it does come down to story, which is ironic because I'm currently the owner of Save the Cat, which we'll get to later. Yes. But it does come down to story. It comes down to a hero's journey. It comes down to the audience associating with that hero and going along for the ride. So I think that is a major factor.
So I assume that there's a sense of satisfaction at the end of a movie or a TV show or something like that helps you to make a decision about it.
Definitely. I mean, it's satisfaction. And, I left out some of the other things. I mean, when you're watching a film, the cinematography, the lighting, I mean, even the coloring, Mike Nichols' films especially are well known for his use of color. It's something in some cases you don't even realize how color is being manipulated, but it affects the tone of the entire film.
Oh, totally. And most of the time you have no idea you're being manipulated by
it.
But it's there for sure. All right. Well, that good segue to Save the Cat, which is, this has been a huge part of your life for a while now. Many of the StoryBeat's listeners are screenwriters or producers or directors, or they're trying to get to that as part of their career. And most of these folks I know will at least know of, if not having read, they may have read Save the Cat. How did you first meet Blake? How'd that come about?
I first met Blake in '86. I was at Freeze Home Entertainment, and he and his dad was a terrific television producer, Big Blue Marble, which won a lot of awards, I think even a Peabody. And Roger Ramjet is how I met them, because there were 165 5-minute episodes of Roger Ramjet done during the Vietnam War, and they were actually pretty revolutionary. And Blake and his dad, Ken, came in to try and sell me Roger Ramjet at Freeze Entertainment. And it just wasn't right for Freeze, but I knew it was right for Rhino Video, and I turned them over to Rhino where they made the sale. But Blake and I just sort of hit it off, and we continued to be friends, and he would call me and we'd work on various projects here and there.
All right. So what was it about Blake that you found that was special about his approach to screenwriting? I know that it ultimately resorted in Save the Cat, but what initially?
It was Blake's enthusiasm, and that actually became a big part of Save the Cat, because his book is infused with enthusiasm. It's a very strong subtext.
That's for sure.
And along with that enthusiasm is a will to help people, to do good. And that was all part of him too. Of course, he was also hysterical, so there was a lot of laughter. So never hurts.
And I think that that's a very good point, that his voice comes through in the book.
Yeah.
I never met Blake Snyder, but I feel like I have met Blake Snyder. I have an idea of who he was as a person.
Yeah, I think his book, ironically, even though I edited the book and the first book, we threw out almost a third of the original draft.
Really?
Yeah, we wanted the book to, that the third that we didn't use, it was all good stuff, some of which we ended up using in Save the Cat Strikes Back, his third book, and we used them in blogs once we set up the blog and started the community. But I felt that it was like editing a movie. It just slowed down the pace. It was sort of secondary or tertiary to what we really wanted to accomplish. And I still edit that way. I just finished editing Save the Cat Writes for TV, which was just recently published. Jamie Nash, who wrote that and was a friend of Blake's. And the job was still to edit in his original manuscript, to edit out a lot of good stuff that just got in the way of what we thought this book should be.
It has a streamlined quality to it, and like a good movie, it wants to move quickly.
Yeah, we want them to be page turners.
Well, sure you do. Of course you do. And so how did he say to you, how did he turn to you and say, why don't you edit this for me? Did he know because you'd already written a book?
That was sort of ironic. Even though I started working with Blake in '86, we would work together for X number of months, and then we wouldn't see each other for 18 months, and then he'd pop into my life for one reason or another. At the time in 2004, I was working for Michael Wiese. Michael is the publisher of most of the film books that you find in any bookstore or online.
Yep.
Well over 200 Michael Wiese production books, all on all aspects of filmmaking. And I had introduced him to Blake. Michael and I were friends. We went way back. In fact, I first met him in '82 when I was at Disney Channel. I acquired a documentary he wrote for the channel. And I had introduced him to Blake somewhere along the line. And then I had lost track of Blake. And Michael called me one day and he said, you know what? I just bought a book from Blake Snyder. You got to be the guy to edit it.
Oh, wow.
So that was in 2004. And Blake and I had a great time editing it. And then the book came out in May of 2005. And Michael had, since he had published so many books, he had just indoctrinated us. He said, listen, the screenwriting book industry is just oversaturated. So don't have too many hopes about this. You just got to realize there's so much competition on how to write a screenplay. Don't get your hopes too high. So the book came out, and Blake had an autograph party at Dunton's, a wonderful bookstore that no longer exists, of course, like most bookstores.
Yep.
in Beverly Hills. And he gave like this 45-minute speech. And he, in spite of my knowledge of Blake from having worked with him, I never saw him in front of a crowd before. And his enthusiasm and his ability to just enthrall people and be funny was like unbelievable. And I was there with my wife, and she turned to me about halfway through and she said, you've got a business. And she was right, meaning that before long, first of all, the book debuted at #1 in the screenwriting category on Amazon, where it's stayed for 16 years now. But I realized Blake's enthusiasm was something that was important, something that could be useful to people. So soon we had workshops and we had a website, and we had quite an active community that built pretty quickly because of Blake's enthusiasm. Blake also put his email address in his books, and he answered hundreds, if not thousands, of emails.
Wow.
As that went on, enthusiastically. When he passed away suddenly in 2009, I can't tell you how many people wrote me saying, I just got an email from him that morning. So he was really something, and a force to be reckoned with.
So, all right. What do you think is the most important message or element of Save the Cat? What is it it's beyond the enthusiasm for it? What is the most important thing that comes out of it?
It's structure. It's how to structure your screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
Blake was a big student of the movies. He really studied hundreds and hundreds of movies. One way he did is, for a long time, he lived in Santa Barbara and commuted every day into an office in Los Angeles. And what he did was he actually made audio tape recordings of films from VHS. And he would listen to these films on his commute.
Interesting.
And he started to notice an awful lot of similarities in almost every film. And this is how that, coupled with books that I read by Sid Field and Vicky King and other people who influenced him, Robert McKee, of course. But he realized that for all these other books, none quite explained structure the way he thought he could. And so he came up with 15 beats.
Right.
He didn't really invent them. He really codified what he heard.
Well, he took the famous 7 plot points and expanded on them.
Exactly. And he gave them cute names that were easy to remember.
Right.
And lots of examples. He also did actually more revolutionary work than the beats, because, as you said, the beats already existed in some form with a lot of people. He did invent genres that were unique. So he didn't talk about Westerns or romances or even comedy. He talked about Monster in the House or Rites of Passage or Golden Fleece. And each of these 10 genres they came up with have 3 elements. And so in helping writers, his goal was for a writer to identify the genre and then be able to study films in that genre, learn from them, learn how to succeed, or then do the same, only different.
Do you think that that's what makes it so popular, is that he's given it some kind of a very basic, fundamental understanding of how this works, with a way to understand it that doesn't feel academic?
Exactly. It's practical. It's very practical. A lot of screenwriting books are more philosophical,
mm-hmm.
and this is really practical. What you should try to do. I won't quite say page by page, but the beats do come in an order. 15 beats do come in an order,
which some of them can be manipulated.
Yeah. Theme stated beat can move around a little bit. The B story beat can move around a little bit, but the others don't move that much. And the other thing is that's really helpful about the beats is though they sound on the surface to be about plot, they're really about character transformation.
Sure, of course.
And so it's a complete hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, of course. And so the beats map that journey. So it's very helpful. Obviously there's a lot of talent needed beyond good structure. A writer has to really know how to write great dialogue, have characters sound different, and so many other things have to happen right. But that firm structure can really help build a story that resonates.
Well, that's my whole, I'm a structuralist. Everything I think about and talk about it is structure. So I have a complete understanding. And I've been teaching in a narrative structure class. I've been teaching Save the Cat as one element of the class for 10 years. So I have an understanding of it. One thing that I think it's important we chat about, which is, I think some people over time have accused Save the Cat of being formulaic. And in fact, some people slavishly follow the formula, if you want to call it that. But I disagree. I don't think it was meant to be a formula. I think it's meant to be a form, just like the 7 plot points are a form, not a formula.
Exactly.
And I think people take it too far.
Yeah, well, formula, I think it's a misunderstanding if you call it a formula. First of all, Billy Wilder and I.A.L. Diamond's films all hit the beats. The Epsteins, Casablanca hits the beats. These great writers who were born long before Blake wrote Save the Cat, hit the beats because they're inherent to a good story.
It's how we in mostly the West, although worldwide at this point, it's how we understand story. But Blake didn't invent storytelling. Blake looked at it and said, here's how it operates, and here's the way the world expects a story to be told.
Right. And some people just reject that. They decide it's formula. But I think there's a couple ways to look at it. One is I have a metaphor, and that is an architecture metaphor. You can look at a lot of different, and by the way, I don't have the architecture terms, but you'll get my point, I hope. You can look at a lot of skyscrapers. They look really different. They look completely different. The materials, the windows, the design, but they all have, the same kind of steel. The steel is all joined by the same kind of rivets. And if I knew more about architecture, I could do a better job.
So when I teach, I actually put up on on the screen in, if I'm doing PowerPoint or Keynote, whatever I'm doing, and I will put up one picture after another of buildings. And I will say, what is this building? And they'll say, it's the Louvre. And I say, what is this? This is the White House. And what is this? Well, that's the Empire State Building. And what is this? Well, this is just a house on the street. And I will say to them, what do these all have in common? And then they start to understand, okay, that's got a foundation, it's got structure, it's got windows, it's got doors, and so on. And when there's a long list of things that they have in common, and yet each one is identifiable as some other thing.
Exactly.
And
that's
so
exactly it.
That's a form. So the fact that you call it a building is a form.
Right.
Formula is when you take the buildings and take them out into the suburbs and build one house that's identical after another. That's a formula.
Then you have mini bricks.
Right. And it's the same thing. You can do the same thing with movies, which is movies are an architectural form. There's a structure to movies. And it becomes a formula when you press them into one DVD after another that's the same, and you watch one after the other. It's the exact same movie. That's a formula.
Exactly. And also, drama or comedy, writing, fiction, you can actually extend this to documentaries.
Oh, for sure. It's definitely
they manipulate the viewer. Well, you manipulate the viewer. And,
as I like to say, if you watch the nightly news, what do they say? Tonight's top story is.
Right.
And so there's a story to how they tell the news and documentary.
Exactly.
And it is storytelling. There's a form to it.
Well, and what happens is, the great storytellers manipulate you, but you don't know you're being manipulated.
Well, yeah.
Where it becomes formula is where something gets made by maybe someone who's not a great storyteller. So you can see the nuts and bolts.
Law and Order has a formula to the way that they're structured every week.
Absolutely.
There is a formula to it. And then within that formula, then they have to be creative in how they expand the form of it.
Exactly.
All right.
So that's a great example.
So all right. Describe the publication process you went through on Save the Cat. What did it take to put together the book totally together and get it out into the world? What was that?
Well, let's talk. The first two books were published by Michael Weese.
Right.
And so I can't really answer that question, but we've self-published the other books, so I can answer it through that.
Okay.
And it's sort of an interesting process. I mean, you need to find a printer, you need to find a distributor, you need to find a layout artist, you need to find a cover artist, you need to find an editor if you're not an editor yourself, and you need some marketing help on a marketing plan. And all those things have to happen in an obvious sequence.
And if you don't go through those steps, you really don't have a finished product, do you?
No, I mean, the other thing, that's if you're self-publishing, of course, I mean, the other thing is to try and find a publisher who and to the publisher, then you'll just hand the manuscript. You'll work with an editor. You may have cover approval, but other than that, it's out of your hands. So
did Blake decide that cover was a good cover at Michael Weese, or did they just put out a book?
That was Michael came up with it completely. It's obviously became iconic.
Oh, it's become a totally iconic.
Yeah.
But so that wasn't an author decision. That was a publisher decision.
That was a publisher decision. I mean, obviously the publisher knew the name Save the Cat was going to be the name of the book. And so that was the impetus for finding a cat who looked like was possibly in some danger, but not too much danger. But Michael found that single image, and that really jumps off the shelf.
Well, sure it does. And people students will sometimes say to me, what does Save the Cat mean? Well, that's part of the lecture. And so it's a very clever way to say this is what you almost are. It's almost obligatory that you have a hero do something that will make us like that hero, and Save the Cat is one way to do it.
Exactly.
So I think that is iconic.
That's had a little bit of a downside where people literally are saving cats in screenplay after screenplay, and we try really hard to pull back writers and say, you know what, you want your hero to save a cat, but not literally save a cat. Do something within his or her world that fits that world,
mm-hmm.
that will win the audience over. but not necessarily. It doesn't have to be a furry creature that they find on the street.
I think it's high time that there was a movie based on a cat saving a man.
I'd like to see that. By the way, Kevin Spacey's company produced House of Cards, and they were big fans of Save the Cat. And I don't know if you remember, but in the pilot, the first episode of House of Cards, the Spacey character, Frank, I can't think of his last name, the politician.
Underwood,
he actually kills a cat or a dog on the street.
That's right.
And that was a knowing nod to Save the Cat that I got quite a kick out of.
All right, so let's talk about Disney for a moment.
Sure.
You've spent 18 years at Disney, retired, this past year or so, yes?
Yeah, just a couple months ago.
Well, congratulations on that.
Thanks.
That's a big deal. I'm guessing there's a certain amount of proprietary information you cannot discuss, and I totally get that. I've worked for the mouse twice, so I understand that culture a little bit. What would you say that it's easier or harder to market for a company like a Disney because they are so iconic and they're so big, or is it easy because everybody knows the product?
A couple things. First of all, I didn't work for the entertainment part of Disney. Ironically, I worked for theme parks.
Well, they're kind of big and iconic.
Oh yeah, they're iconic. But I mean, I just wanted to make it clear it had nothing to do with.
So just so you know, I spent a year helping to build Epcot Center.
Oh, great! That actually sounds like it should have been fun.
I was working at what was then called WED Enterprises, is now WDI.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's it's both easier and harder, Steve. I think it's easier because people are familiar with mostly what we're writing about. That's exactly why it's harder. Because how do you keep it fresh? How do you not say magic or magical in every sentence? That was a daily issue.
How do you avoid the word magical?
Well, you use it, but you can't use it more than once per page.
So it is, after all, called the Magic Kingdom.
It's the Magic Kingdom, and much there is magical. But if you're writing about describing an attraction or a restaurant or a theme show, a show at a theme park, or even transportation, you can get carried away by using the term magic so much, and just becomes noise if you're not too careful.
I would assume that there is a sort of an automatic, without thinking about it, you don't have to educate the people you're selling to about what Disney is or means. What you're trying to educate them on is this particular product.
Exactly.
This one little thing, as opposed to the whole.
Exactly. I mean, the theme park pages, and there's also resorts like Aulani, and there's also Disney weddings and Disney events and Disney Vacation Club, along with the major sites that you mentioned at the top of the show. There's stuff that people are spending a lot of money on, and you have to give them information. These sites, even though they're marketing sites, are really information providers.
Well, that makes sense. You're not selling tickets there, right?
Right. No.
So you're providing the public with a knowledge of what it is that they're going to spend their dollars on.
Exactly. Whether it's a ride like Pirates of the Caribbean, whether it's a restaurant, there's all sorts of, there's so many restaurants at those parks. Whether it's a show, even whether it's a shop with certain merchandise or certain food. Is there a particular way that they trained you when you first started, that this is the Disney way, or did you just have at it? The answer is no. I wasn't trained. I had been writing a lot of, I can give you a little segue story that we haven't covered. All the product that I acquired through the years, even though my job wasn't to sell film, when you acquire something, you always think you can sell, or you know how to sell it, or you bought it because you think it can be sold.
Makes sense.
So somewhere along the line, I flipped to the sales side of it. But that was self-taught. I never took a marketing course. I never took an advertising course.
And nobody at Disney came and corrected you and said, no, we don't do it this way. You just,
not really. It's funny when that division hired 2 writers. We started the same day. One was a wonderful, great guy named Steve Tatum, who came from WDI that you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So he was an Imagineer, and me. And we walked in, we had 2 live sites, DisneyWorld.com and Disneyland.com.
Right.
And we just sort of figured it out. I mean, we had a strong league. The legal team looked at everything. So if there was anyone teaching us, it was the legal team telling us what we couldn't do.
Isn't that interesting? Well, because I'm sure that they have been sued more than once, and I'm sure that they have sued people themselves more than once. And so that they look at things from that perspective. And
absolutely.
And that has as much, if any, I guess as much, if anything, to do with the fact that they are so big and so public.
Yeah, they're so big, they're so public, and there's a lot of litigious people who just love to go after them. So there's a lot of care involved in not overpromising and representing what really
So what would you say are your favorite moments from working for the Mouse?
My favorite moment actually may not be from the 18 years at Disney Digital. It goes back to the Disney Channel. Because this is my favorite corporate story for anyone who's ever been involved in a corporation. We were going to put Splash on the Disney Channel. And there was Splash had been a big, big Disney hit, the biggest hit they'd had in a long time theatrically. And there was a big issue because there was a quick shot of Daryl Hannah's butt. She was the mermaid. And the big issue was, are we going to, when this film goes on the Disney Channel into the homes of Americans everywhere, are we going to allow that butt to be shot, or are we going to cut it out? So Jim Jamero was the head of the Disney Channel, and he called a big meeting with everyone there. And there was a lot to discuss, but that was one issue. And we're all gathered, a couple hundred people in this big room. So soon before Jamero appears, there's a person whose name we'll use her initials, LP. She raises her hand and she stands up and she says to all of us sitting there, I want you to know that I've worked for Disney for so-and-so amount of years, and Daryl Hannah's butt is going to be on screen at the Disney Channel over my dead body. And so we all took that in, and Jamero appears. He walks down in front, he goes from the podium, he looks up at everyone and says, good morning. He says, I'm going to tackle one subject. We have a lot to talk about. I'm going to tackle one thing right at the top, and that is whether we're going to edit Splash or not. And I want you to know I've made my decision, and I'm not going to be talked out of it. I want you to know the decision is we're going to go with what the filmmakers did. We're going to keep that butt. We're not going to edit a film. And LP's hand shoots up, and Jamero sees the hand, and he calls her by name, and she stands up, and she says, Jim, I just want you to know we're all behind you. We think that's a great decision.
And that, my friends, is known as business.
Boy, I'll never forget that, because the whole thing happened within probably a minute from the start to the end. And the shamelessness, you realize there were 200 people there. She had the shamelessness of doing a complete 180 or 360, whatever it was just,
Well, it's either business or politics, one or the other, but it's exactly how it operates.
Right. So that's one of my favorite stories.
I've been talking to BJ Markel for almost an hour now, and we're going to wind this thing down just a little bit. And so I'm just wondering, in all of your experiences, you have worked with lots of different people in different ways in different fields. Do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip that you can lend to those who are sort of starting out in the business, or maybe they're in a little bit and they want to get to the next level? And it could be scriptwriters, and it could be marketers, it could be any of those.
It's hard to answer that question without going into a cliche, I think, but I think I do have an answer. When the Disney Channel was announced, I actually had been taking time off to write a novel, and I was actually a chauffeur.
A chauffeur?
Yes, I worked before being a chauffeur. I worked for a few months at Beverly Hills Cab, but then I became a chauffeur at Music Express, a wonderful company. I don't know if it exists anymore. Anyway, suddenly the Disney Channel was announced, and it was announced they were looking for an acquisitions person. And it was, there was just no doubt in my mind that there were hundreds, if not 1,000 resumes pouring in to Jim Jamero and his team to try and figure out who to hire to head up acquisitions. So what I did, and to try and stand out, and that's I've got the point of this is how do you try to stand out above the crowd, is I found Jamero's home address. Ironically, I found it in something called the White Pages.
If anybody is under the age of 50, they might not know what that means.
So the White Pages was a telephone book, and a lot of people didn't list. They had unlisted numbers, especially if you're a celebrity of any kind. But Jamero, being a business person, I found it, and so I sent my resume to his house, and my cover letter was, "Hope you're not offended by this, but sometimes you have to do something to stand out from the crowd." And within 48 hours, I was contacted by Disney HR people. The next day, I met Jamero. He hired me on the spot. So basically, in 3 days after writing that, I got that job, which led to a really terrific career.
I would say the only caveat on that story is you have to be careful not to appear to be a stalker of some kind.
You took my second punchline away from me. You're right. I don't think you could do that today. I think today you could get arrested for doing that.
I think you may not get arrested for sending somebody a letter. You just won't get an answer.
You definitely won't get an answer. Yeah, and you might get a knock on your door. You just have to try and stand out from the crowd. Think of doing something a little unique to stand out from the crowd and be noticed and get your foot in the door.
And that can be in any number of ways. I mean, that's very wise advice, because standing out from the crowd is what makes success stories out of people who would otherwise not be a success story. And, everybody tries to go into that middle, I think. And the people that really succeed tend to go toward the fringes and somehow make that equate to the middle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally get it. I mean, there's a lot of people with talent who don't make it.
Absolutely. A ton of them.
I'm going to quote someone who's probably never been quoted on StoryBeat before. Okay. The singer John Davidson, if anyone remembers him.
No, but I actually have had a person on the show talking about John Davidson.
Oh, no. I was shocked. Well, I actually started in summer stock in 1968 and 69, and we could talk about 24 hours on that. But John Davidson got he was in a show at the summer stock tent I worked at, and he answered some questions after the show, and someone asked him about how do you succeed in show business, and he floored me with his honesty. He said, "There's a lot of people with as good, if not better, voice than me, but you got to get a break, and if you get the break, you can have a career." And that was really honest.
There is without question a certain amount of serendipity and luck that goes into becoming a successful person. And the truth is, pretty much everyone that goes out to Hollywood with a dream of being a success probably has some degree of talent. And the question is how do they separate themselves from the crowd? How do they get someone to help them? How do they find a way in a certain door? Right. All those things. And there is no one path, and it drives people crazy trying to explain how you can do this, because there are a lot of people that try to exploit that by saying this is how you do X, Y, or Z.
Right.
And there is no one way. There's no approved method. I like to tell people there is no Hollywood welcome canteen when you get there.
That's for sure.
You kind of have to find your way. Well, BJ, this has been just a fantastic, entertaining hour about.
Thanks, I've really enjoyed it.
Especially about something that could have been a very dry bunch of topics, but this is really very entertaining. And so the notion of finding other things to do within the business that aren't necessarily what you start out to do is very important.
Yeah, I mean, your resume sort of builds itself. I never expected to become a film acquisitions person, but I ended up being a pioneer, and that just sort of, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I imagine there aren't many 5 or 6-year-olds who are watching TV and think to themselves, I'd like to become a film acquisitions person.
Not too likely.
Not too likely. Well, I cannot thank you enough for spending an hour with me today. And I'm deeply appreciative of your time and of your wisdom and expertise on all these very interesting topics that don't normally show up on this show.
Thanks, Steve. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great Story Beat episodes to you. Story Beat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden. And may all your stories be unforgettable.